What appears to be a former Black Lives Matter activist is on Twitter accusing Shaun King peripherally, but ultimately Black Lives Matter, of embezzling or some kind of scam. I don't know exactly what her accusation is, but she tweeted this out, and it's getting a decent amount of traction. I mean, I'm not familiar with Ashley Yates. She's got, I think, like 45,000 followers, and the initial tweet has 167 retweets. She said, "If you still support Black Lives Matter, effing unfollow me. Along with Shaun King, they are effing firefest of social justice, and folks just keep throwing money at them. And spineless ass media kept writing about them and continues to, all complicit." I completely agree. This is one of the biggest problems I have with these particular activists. Yeah, they're the fire fest of social justice. That's fantastic. That's such a great analogy. Bravo, Ashley. I get look what Shaun King does, right? He's repeatedly published false stories and false narratives. It empowers him. It makes him wealthy. And I'm not going to get too much into Shaun King because this is more about the bigger picture. But I feel like these people claim to be about social justice, but they're grifters, right? The social justice left on Twitter likes to accuse conservative personalities of being grifters, and I recently had some journalists who later got laid off accuse me of the conservative media grift, and it's such a stupid thing just to say because it ignores all of the nuance, all of it. And when I made a video a couple weeks ago criticizing Ben Shapiro, sort of, it wasn't like overly harsh. I was just saying, he shouldn't have done a sponsor thing at the March for Life. He lost his sponsors because of it. But I've made there's videos on this channel about gaming. Like nothing. I made videos on this channel about Marvel. And they're like, Tim's in the community. You know what, man? I got a message from some person claiming that when you interview Gavin McInnes but don't interview the left, it proves you're biased. And it's like, dude, I've interviewed Antifa on 2 occasions and Gavin for 3 minutes. They don't watch these videos. But anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. Let's go back to this story. Ashley says, Black Lives Matter has no staff. The remaining co-founder is now working with Shaun King on another one of his shell projects, and millions of dollars are unaccounted for since 2014. These scammers all need to be indicted. She continues, Black Lives Matter fiscal sponsor took in $6.5 million the year after Ferguson 2015, and less than $2 million in 2014 when Black Lives Matter didn't even exist. That's not true. I believe Black Lives Matter were launched with Trayvon Martin, so that may have been early 2014. Or possibly late 2013. I think 2014. It wasn't necessarily Ferguson that launched Black Lives Matter, but it did get them probably the most relevance. So I think that's probably what her misconception is. But I'm fairly certain, I could be wrong, that Trayvon Martin triggered Black Lives Matter. Where is all the money? Chapters get very minimal, and everyone in charge of the money is a liar. I would be willing to bet that's true. I don't know if it's true, right? Keep in mind, these are. I guess you could say calling someone a liar is an opinion. I don't know if it's a statement of fact. She says 6.5 million in 1 year. This is true. I actually pulled up the 990 for the organization she's calling out. It's called 1,000 something. We'll pull it up. We'll get to it. But I looked at this document. It's actually interesting. We'll look at that too. She says, media has been complicit, and I'm going to start naming some of the folks that continued to carry Black Lives Matter's lies and call it journalism too. No integrity, none. I also agree. Bravo. Absolutely. 100%. I feel like you've got a lot of these white, progressive, upper-class folks exploiting these tragedies for money. Hands down. Absolutely hands down. Completely agree. She says it was all a scam. And then there's, she links to one of her own tweets. What happened to Black Lives Matter? Here's one take. Maybe we'll come to these. She goes on to say, I've said it before and will continue to. Sarah Kendzior is the only journalist I've seen write with integrity and clarity about the exploitation of Ferguson, what it meant. And there's the story that Sarah wrote called Meet Darren Seals, Then Tell Me Black Death is Not a Business. This is actually a really interesting story for the most part, but that's kind of her take, and I think that's what Ashley... I'm not going to read through this. Maybe I'll just think on it later, but I want to focus on kind of the bigger picture. Maybe we'll come to it in a second. She says, just because it bothers me to share without sourcing, Thousand Currents, formerly IDEX, is the fiscal sponsor of Black Lives Matter. You can view some of their finance info, including what I shared, on their site. How much went to Black Lives Matter and what happened to it? So this is really interesting. Peace of Mind responded to her saying, wow, Jesus. And she said, yeah. And that's just 1 year and one source of revenue. I had concerns since the donations started rolling in from day one. And I asked each of the co-founders individually what happened to all the money several times. Each time I got the runaround, outright dismissed. And that's wrong. I mean, no other way to put it. This here is what we call a Form 990. If you're not familiar with what this is, nonprofits, I believe 501c3s. I don't believe 501c4s file these. So basically, 501c3 is tax exempt, but it can't do anything political. I could be wrong. I used to work for nonprofits as a director, so I should know these things. But 501c4, so hold on. Because this is tax deductible, they have to publish how much money they bring and where it goes. People have to know what they're spending money on. And that also means I don't believe they pay a corporate tax. I believe that's the case. 501c4s are not tax deductible, and I'm pretty and they don't publish. So typically what you see is most nonprofits will operate a 501c3 and a 501c4. They take in donations through the 501c4, so they don't have to disclose how much they're making and how much they're paying their staff. And the 501c3 section is what looks all bubbly and happy. But here we can see she's correct. For 2015, this organization, which I'm not familiar who this is, it's called International Development Exchange. And this is actually from thousandcurrents.org. You can see if there's the URL, 1000 Currents. So this is the form they published as their 990. And we can see that they brought in $6,487,521 in 2015. In 2014, they only brought in just about $2 million. Now, I'm not one to claim, I don't think it's fair to claim it's being stolen or anything like that. We can see that they had assets, $5 million, so I'm curious as to what that is, and expenses over $2 million. That's pretty damn hefty. I'd be curious to know what they're spending it on for the most part, but we can see that when you scroll down in the 990, there's a bunch of stuff that I don't think matters for the most part. The only thing that I found really interesting is that they only have one person getting paid a six-figure salary, and that's Rajasvini Bansali, who's the executive director, and he's getting $103,461. That's how much he got paid in that year. We can then see that their board member, secretary, treasurers, they're not getting paid anything. This is actually really normal. Now, I'm not making any direct accusations towards this organization, which Ashley says is the fiscal sponsor for Black Lives Matter. I didn't look into that. I don't want to substantiate any of her accusations. I just think it's kind of interesting to bring up. But I will point out one thing you have to be really careful with these nonprofits is how they operate a kind of like, and I don't want to say it's a racket, but one of the things they'll do is there will be as I mentioned, they'll have different nonprofits. There could be 2 501c3s, 2 501c4s, and I think a sporting organization is like a 501c6. I think the NFL might be that. I'm not sure. But anyway, what they do is they'll operate as many different nonprofits as possible. You'll see this 990 and go, oh, but look at that. They're not even paying anybody. Then you'll look into who this guy is, and you'll find out he's a treasurer on a different company. And then, I'm not saying he is, I'm just saying hypothetically, there are nonprofits doing this. I know who they are. I'm not going to call them out because it would, big legal battle. The point is, they move staff around, and then they can put out a 990 saying, we don't even take a salary. And what you don't realize is they get cushy jobs elsewhere, right? So it's effectively kind of like a big racket. But here's the thing. She highlights 2015. Let's take a look and see if we can substantiate any of these accusations that, I don't think we can substantiate any of those accusations. I would be interested to know where that money is going if she's claiming this is the fiscal sponsor. She's outright saying these people need to be indicted. But let's take a look at how much money they raised on their fiscal form for 2017, which is going to be their 2016 income. We can see that it actually went down. I'm going to have to go ahead and make the assumption, okay? This is just my assumption, may or may not be true. We can see this as 1000 Currents. Used to be International Development Exchange. In 2015, they brought in $6.5 million, and they only brought in $4 million in 2016. I think that kind of makes sense, right? So Black Lives Matter happens towards the end of 2014, and this is when I left Vice and joined Fusion, and this narrative of Black Lives Matter started expanding rather rapidly. That makes sense then that in 2015, they would bring in substantially more money because of the press surrounding Black Lives Matter. And then, Black Lives Matter died down quite a bit in 2016, and it hasn't been as big. I mean, the Ferguson riots were ongoing for months, over a year. So then coming into 2016, their money goes down. It's still up. So it does seem to me like Black Lives Matter, assuming she's correct when she says that they're the financial sponsor, they did benefit greatly. But I also think it's unfair just to assume the money is going to nefarious purposes or it's being stolen. However, in my opinion, having worked for these nonprofits, I am much more likely to assume corruption. But again, I don't think it's fair to simply pull up the fact that they made money and accuse them of wrongdoing. That's not fair at all. There's a lot of people who make a lot of money. Jordan Peterson makes a lot of money, right? I don't think it's fair to assume, like, what's he doing? You know, no one's screaming and pulling up demanding his financials. And a lot of people are giving money to him based on ideological reasons for the work he does. And no one's clamoring about who he's hiring in his research and everything like that. So just because you don't know doesn't mean it's fair to accuse them of wrongdoing. I'm no fan of Shaun King. Don't get me wrong. I want to go down and look at their salaries and see if there's been any changes. However, we can see here that Rajesh Vini, a year later, he got a raise by about $16,000 plus dollars, $16,000, I think $700 or so dollars. And he got another $6,000 in other compensation. But once again, we can see everyone else isn't really getting a salary. As an executive director's salary goes, 120 is actually really low. And I know I'm being rather, I don't know, lenient, or I don't know what the right word is, but I'll say this. There's a reason why I think executive directors of nonprofits, in many instances, should be getting paid a lot more than this. Because you're asking someone to work a high-capacity job, a leadership role for a corporation, yes, nonprofits are corporations, and then get paid substantially less. Like, this is on par with what a developer at, like, a tech firm can make. In fact, I saw someone post the other day that managers at In-N-Out get $160,000. So you want someone to effectively run a nonprofit and get paid less than that, it's not competitive. So I actually don't think that's a lot of money for an executive director position. However, we don't really know what they're doing, and that's the thing about nonprofits. People are giving money to this for ideological reasons, and we don't know necessarily what they're spending their money on for the most part. But we can go back up and look and see that their total expenses was greater. This is interesting, right? So line 18 says their total expenses for the year they brought in that 6.5, 2015, was $2.3 million, and the current year, which is 2016, was greater than the amount of their revenue, which means they have a net loss. And I believe we can see the revenue less expenses. They have a net loss of $475,000. So look, we can see that Rajesh Vini signed here. Also, I'll end by saying this: the accusation was thrown out into the ether. I don't think it's fair to just assume wrongdoing. But I will say my opinion of Shaun King is not positive. Okay, I've seen him exploit these circumstances. We've seen other journalists write about how they exploit. What do they say? How Black Death, they call it a business, right? She's accusing these people of doing this. And we have activists who are outraged and want to know where this money is going. I absolutely believe it's fair to demand, like, where is this money going? You're using this, you're making money, where is that money going? Keep in mind one last thing. First of all unsubstantiated, just accusations from other activists. None of this is definitively true. I do think it's unfair to accuse people just because they have money, and you also don't know what their net revenue was, right? So actually, I'm gonna do one more thing before we get out of here. I want to know what their net revenue was for their 2015 filing. They brought in $4.2 million after expenses, so it was a very, very large net gain. That's really good. I'd be curious to know where that money goes, especially if they saw a net loss in the year following. So one more thing, we can see their total assets at the end of the year is $4.8 million. We can see it's a combination from the 500 they had the year prior, plus the revenue they made in 2015. And then in 2016, their total assets is still 4.6. So it went down a little bit. But if they're holding the assets, it sounds like they still actually just are sitting on the money. So again, accuse them. I don't know. I don't necessarily think it's fair to make those accusations just based off of the fact they have money. But certainly it's fair to say activists are angry about this and journalists are accusing them of profiting. So there you go. Anyway, more videos to come later today. Stick around. I'll have a video on this channel at 1 p.m. and another video on my main channel, youtube.com/Timcast at 4 p.m. I'll see you all then.